Yes, I know. As long as they don't talk about it, and number we haven't got a spot. We haven't got a spot tonight. Partners got those. So next time I have to do yeah, before Christmas. Yes. Of my Sundays. Sure, down there, 2 days last week, and yeah.
Hello, can we have some information?
Okay, is everyone ready to sit down? Super. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We will try not to go on too long, which I do sometimes have trouble with. Now, Now, you may observe that the clerk isn't here tonight. She has COVID in the family, so we felt it was better if she didn't come. So I am actually attempting to record the meeting, and Ruby has very kindly offered to take some notes as well. So between one thing and another, we'll probably okay. No, we started. Thank you. Okay. I'm not going to stand up the whole meeting. So let's press on with the agenda. Apologies for absence. I have apologies from John Hayway, who's busy farming. Apologies also from Alison and Paul Austin and from Steve Allen. And apologies from the clerk, obviously, as well, because she's not able to come because of COVID. So, item number 2, to note the minutes of the annual meeting held on 13th of May 2019, any matters of writing. So here's the first problem. Because the clerk isn't here, I haven't got a copy of this. If anybody else has, they can have any matters arising, but it's so long ago now that nobody can remember. So it could say anything. That's more recent.
2019.
Oh, that's 2019. Oh, never mind. It's probably out of date now. But thank you very much, Ruby. Okay, does anybody want to say anything about the last time we had an annual parish meeting? It is a very long time ago. We must apologise. Obviously, COVID got in the way both in 2020 and in 2021. So we decided that we would have this annual parish meeting at one of the earliest possible moments when we're legally allowed to have it, because you have to have it between March and May during those 3 months. So item number 3 to receive a praise sheet. Yeah.
Can I write that we've agreed the minutes?
No, I don't think we can, because the minutes weren't available. So the parish council does actually approve the annual parish meeting minutes at the next meeting. So they were approved in 2019. Thank you very much. We have a very efficient local clerk here. Yeah. Okay, item number 3, praise sheet of the chair's report. I'm not sure whether there's anything that's worth saying about this that isn't on the agenda a bit later, except perhaps about the finance. So I will actually just ask if anybody, the finance figures are there. I think I say in here, fully detailed accounts are available on the question of the clerk if anybody wants them. I've already had one whinge about the accounts. David, would you like to make a point?
Yes, I would like to whinge on this point. For the last 15 years, I have done the accounts and we have always budgeted to spend less than we've got. And suddenly, we are now spending 1,200 quid in the budget more than we are having income. Now, I appreciate cost rise. The clerk's salary, for example, is 3 times what it was a year ago. But I think the parish council should budget to spend within its limits. Because we have substantial investments which are part of the income, and the hill is obviously part of the income. But in my time, the idea was always that we would use the investment income to alleviate the situation if the hill became technologically changed and they didn't want it anymore. And suddenly, we are now spending more money than we've got, even with a very substantial rise in the hill income. And I think that is wrong. We should budget within our income, particularly in this time.
Point taken.
I've only got a draft of your report here, but in this, the expenditure is less than the predicted income. So unless that's changed since the one that you emailed us.
This was the budget figure below the main.
Yeah, so our budget for next year has expenditure of 11,625 and predicted income of 13,800. So that's those figures
I'm
change.
sorry, it looks like you have the wrong version of
Okay, I've only got draft. Okay, so that's changed.
The current figures are 15,500 expenditure and 14,000.
Yeah, I think if I can just make a point about that, Dave, there are a number of contingency style items in there, and I suspect that although the budget is technically higher than the expected income, that in fact we will be balanced during the year. But I take your point, and Parish Council will consider that at its next meeting to see if maybe some budget items should be perhaps trimmed.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
But thank you for your point. Anybody else? Thank you, John.
You mentioned the main figures here, but we seem to be missing about £100,000. What's the situation with that?
You mean I haven't? We haven't in here got the actual assets of the
Exactly, yeah. Yes, well, where are we? What we do that now?
We are. I haven't actually got the latest one in front of me. Roughly speaking, we have approximately £125,000 in the Hargreaves Lansdowne investments, and some cash in there. But yeah, what you see here in terms of the balance carried forward is the money that we have, the ready cash that we have in the bank.
Okay, but the pot is very similar to the amount it was last year.
Yeah, absolutely.
130 down to about 125, roughly.
It's obviously fluctuating quite a lot at the moment, but in the draft version that I have here, because we're not quite at the end of the year yet, although the real figures do exist, and I think these figures that I put in here are as close to being actuals as we can get them. I just haven't got the detailed one, but in terms of the assets, they're to the nearest thousand, almost identical. Any other questions on finance? No. Good. Let me just check that there's nothing else on here that isn't later on the agenda. We're talking about communications and the common. We mentioned NATS, which, as David says, there is going to be a substantial increase. We were waiting for the February inflation figure before we got the exact number. We have got it tonight, and it is around 20% uplift. The only other thing to mention on that is that the Common Cause project, which we are part of, and those of you who've been following this will remember that 3 Shropshire Commons are part of the Common Cause project. It's now being renamed the Uplands Commons project, although technically our Upland Commons project. They have given us various bits of equipment which enable us in the longer term to use less in the way of chemical control. We'll be discussing that in detail shortly. Is there anything else in this annual report that anyone wants to raise? No? Good. Okay, let's move on to planting of 70 trees on Clean Liberty to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I believe we had a good collection of volunteers to help with this. Scarlett, do you want to say something about it, or should we ask Guy to say something about it?
I'm happy for Guy did work.
Guy was the man.
Yeah, we've got the planters a week ago on Thursday, and we finished the garden on Monday this week. And we have about five villagers up there to help.
Super.
Done in good conditions, and Tamsin is busy watering at the moment. But it would be quite helpful if anybody who goes up the badges could throw a bit of water on them and they have to be passing by. It's not quite as casual as it sounds, which we've made a little drinking place near the trees, left two little plastic buckets up there. And it's really a matter of dividing it up into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You work your way down the trees depending on which day you have to go up there.
And so the water can come from the stream, is that right?
Yeah, but you don't have to clamber right down to the pockets to get it.
Okay, so anybody who'd like to volunteer that, who should they speak to? Or
Myself, I suppose. I mean, it's just about pointing out where the water is and where the bucket is. We can put it on the website even.
okay, super. Thank you.
The God votes thanks for everybody who's involved. I know Guy did an awful lot of work himself as well as all the organising. I know many other community volunteers were involved, so thank you to everybody.
Yep. Yes, indeed, thank you. Okay, point number 5, consider the future direction of tree liberty management. That's Bracken and course control, biodiversity and carbon footprint. Now, we're considering kind of two things here. One is the plan for this year, and the other is a slightly longer term plan. So this is against a backdrop of, you will recall that we had some trouble a few years ago with Natural England suggesting that we might be in breach of EIA regulations. And although we won that particular battle, that is perhaps a temporary situation. And what we proposed to Natural England at the time, and what was at the root of our claim that it should not be subject to EIA, a full EIA application, was that we are not in fact reducing effectively the amount of the common that is covered in Bracken and Gorse, that we are not increasing the amount of grazing or area available for grazing. We are simply trying to maintain the status quo. And we produced a management plan which said we're going around certain areas of common over I suppose, a 10-year program. And that at the moment is what we're working to. And I believe that the Commoners Association have given us a map which is kind of consistent, although I see there is what appears to be a mistake in one large area that is not very, that is much bigger than it should be. But that is, I think, broadly within the plan that we presented to Natural England in 2019. So let's say long term and short term. This year, I would like some feedback, or the council would like some feedback from this meeting as to what we actually agree to carry out. And I should say that Ian Hayway has agreed to be the parish council person who will be supervising the works that are taking place. So this isn't a question of a free-for-all and letting the Commoners Association do what they like. The parish council will be controlling exactly what gets done. And it will be some crushing, or this is the proposal, I should say, some crushing, some robo-cutting, the robo-cutter being a piece of equipment that was being lent to us by the, what's it called now, the Uplands Common project. Also some topping and some weed wiping. And, we're not doing spraying as such, but we are doing, we're using a smaller amount of chemical to do some weed wiping, or at least that's the proposal. But that proposal will be finalised and agreed at the next parish council meeting, and that will take into account the views of this meeting. So, without further ado, I think what I'd like to do probably is, well, can I first of all point out the mistake on the map? I think everyone should be able to see a map or a copy of the map, but the mistake on the map is as follows. If you look in the middle of the common, where the words Clee Liberty are, just to the left of that, there is the big gutter. Is that called Millbridge? Is that correct?
What?
Is it called Millbridge gutter? Nesta would know what she's gone out. Doug, is that big gully down the middle of the common, is that called Millbridge gutter? Sorry, that's all. Is that called Millbridge gutter? That big gully?
Yes, yeah.
Right, Millbridge gutter, the big gully. It's the biggest one. It's where the stream goes under the stone road and then goes into a big deep gully. That, roughly speaking, also is where the big gorse patch starts and goes up from there. Now, on this map, it mistakenly shows some crushing happening up to the right of Millbridge gutter, and that's not correct. Basically, the crushing doesn't really go any further than the line which comes from the hill houses, if you can see where those are, and where Millbridge gutter crosses the road. So that because there's all sorts of things there. There are mines, there's rushes, there's wetlands, and there's the big gorse patch, and we're not touching the big mature gorse patch. So just with that proviso that this map is actually clearly incorrect, and we will be correcting that at the next parish council meeting. Anyway, would anyone like to make any comments about this year, or indeed about the future direction? Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, you're talking about maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
But I would suggest that it's really time we upped our game to looking much more seriously at biodiversity, given that the whole country really is facing a crisis really of biodiversity. And we've got climate change, we've got a whole raft of things going on in agricultural practices which really are reducing our biodiversity. Isn't it time that the parish council looked, instead of maintaining your programme of gorse and bracken control, look much more forensically at habitats that actually could enhance biodiversity? For example, what I call the Tumpy Gorse Patch, which is from Clean Liberty, from North Bank towards the big gorse patch where most of the bird life is. I've studied that area quite a lot. It's largely pruned by grazing sheep into these little tumps. They're a very good source of insect life, which is also feeds into bird life, such as skylarks, which are insectivorous, partly insectivorous, and yellowhammers, stonechats, all the things we like to see up there, small birds. So if you're going to remove those tumpy gorse patches, I just want to know why. Could you explain why it's so important for you to, control the gorse, given that we are really facing big pressure on wildlife habitats?
If I can just, I'm sure there are other people who want to come in, but if I can just say why the observation that various members of the council have made, and I'm sure the Commons Association members as well, is that the amount of gorse that is there has ballooned hugely over the last 5 or 6 years. Now, you may dispute that, but not so long ago, there wasn't really that much the chunky bits, what I call immature gorse, but I think you don't want me to call it immature gorse, but that area between, as you say, the main gorse patch and Northern Bank, that didn't contain that much gorse, and then to the left-hand side of the Stone Road, right as far as Millbridge Gutter.
But that doesn't answer my question of,
Yeah.
of why. We know that gorse is, increasing.
Yeah.
But most of the common looks like this. In compartments 1 and 2, it is compacted, overgrazed turf and bracken. That's what it looks like. There is not a shrub. It is devoid of any of the matrix layers that favour biodiversity. And for you to want to remove this area, which I regard as being, very, very useful for biodiversity, in the absence of there not being another strategy, which is to preserve the acid grass, to allow some seeding. You have to remember that acid grassland, where everybody bangs on about it, is so important, doesn't set seed, doesn't flower, does not provide nectar or pollen, does not enhance the seed bank, and the turf is becoming impoverished. I've been here for over 40 years. I came here, I was just writing up my thesis in grassland management. So I have walked around looking at the ground for 40 years, and I've noticed this impoverishment. And I'm sure other people have as well.
Can you just clarify for everybody, well, for me, and maybe everybody else knows what you mean. When you say compartments 1 and 2, what is that from?
That is designated the Simpson report of '99.
Oh, right, okay.
Which is compartment 1, it goes from the Yell, North Bank, to the, past the sands. And compartment 2 is the area you were talking about, really.
Yeah.
Which leads up to what he calls streams with, particularly in, what we divide in,
You want to see it?
extensive,
That's the map.
flush areas.
That's,
Okay, thank
but
you.
I want that back.
So that's what we would kind of call the quarry areas, a sort of, the bit where you do see small wildlife at least.
Yeah, okay. So basically, compartment 2 is all the batches.
Yeah, the matches,
And
and
to the left of the Stone Road,
Yeah,
all the batches.
yeah.
And compartment
then
3.
compartment 3 is the area with the thicker doors and the up to the quarry, the mine areas, where there used to be heather. I don't know that I don't think there's much heather left. And
No, I
the
think
bilberries,
there's-
especially batteries used to go over there. So
There's
that's
Bilberry, but no.
bilberries, yeah. The plants are there, I think, in vestigial restricted growth.
Yeah.
And it would be really interesting to, in the absence of there being any hope of reducing stocking levels, to fence off some areas temporarily, 6 months, maybe 9, 12 months, see what's there, and see if we can replenish at least the seed stock.
How big an area are you talking about?
What for
For
fencing off?
fencing off, yeah.
Up for debate, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I believe that there are some small limits, like 5% of the common or something like that. I can't remember what it is, where you don't have a particularly heavy consultation process or permission process. You can do what you suggest. You can do a small area for a short length of time, without certainly without getting permission from Natural England or whatever, and those things just take a long time. I don't know, other people may want to say things about this. Ruby.
Sorry, well, I really wanted to support what Polly's saying in terms of biodiversity and
the national and the global crisis that we're experiencing. And I agree with Polly that I think the time has come for us to stand up and be counted and do something about it. And I take your point about small areas, but I do believe that the Secretary of State has discretion to grant permission for larger areas. And my understanding is that that is highly likely to be given if it's part of an overall coherent scheme for improving biodiversity in the area. So I think that we would have a good chance of doing that, but we have to have the will to do it. We all know there are lots of competing stakeholders and competing interests on this. But I would want to support Polly and say that I think the time has come to stand up to be counted.
Yeah.
It's not a couple of years ago.
Well,
Not 10 years ago.
Right, doesn't this bring us pretty much back to where we go round and round? And sort of the elephant in the room is we haven't found a mechanism to get together people to create a management plan which is acceptable to the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of goodwill. So there are competing, not aggressively, but competing interests in what needs to be done. And where we failed is to find that mechanism. And if we could find the mechanism, then these things can develop. But to my mind, unless we find a mechanism for taking this forward, we're going to have competing views going on all the time. I don't know what the mechanism is, but we haven't failed, we just haven't achieved getting the mechanism in place.
Yeah.
I do that.
I think that's right. The Simpson report had zero buy-in from the graziers, and the attempt to have an agricultural plan, which would have provided some money for destocking, basically didn't have sufficient unanimous support from some of the graziers, some of the commons. And this is a problem with, I think the point you make, Ruby, is that I don't think we are anywhere near the situation where DEFRA are prepared to override the wishes of the graziers. So you have to get the graziers to agree. I think naturally in England, if a reasonable number of commoners, and I mean influential commoners, people whose livelihoods are at stake, if a reasonable proportion of them, plus the owner, goes to DEFRA and say, can we put a big fence up, then yes, I'm sure permission would be granted. But the problem is, as John Thurwell has said, is we haven't found a mechanism of getting that agreement. And we cannot, as the owner, impose restrictions on graziers, because the graziers have the right to graze. So we have to therefore provide them with some kind of incentive. And there is, well, what we
This
have.
is the incentive to save our planet a bit.
Sorry, I
Does
missed
the
that.
incentive always have to be about money and etc.? Can't it be about the fact that we actually seriously need to start doing something? Because otherwise we're going to procrastinate till we're already hungry.
Well, yes, possibly, yeah, possibly, but you know, the grazier is the person who gets hit in the pocket. You know, if we all said, yes, all right, we'll use half the amount of heating oil next year that we used last year, and we'll have cold houses, so will you take a few sheep off the hill? They'd probably say yes, but who's going to, you know, realistically, who is going to say that? I mean, yes, it does have to be about money, because we're talking about people's lives. I mean,
But you sorry, Nikki, I don't think you in effect proved my point. You said, well, we can't, you know, introduce different agri schemes because it's going to hit people's, you know, it's their living. But that comes down to your management policies then. So actually not wiping out little tumpy gauzy bits which provide food for skylarks is probably the best you can do at the present time. You know, you can't, we're not going to get the sheep off the common, or we can reduce the grazing level. I think we probably all know that. But, you know, at least you can navigate a more biodiverse management plan.
Yeah.
Which doesn't necessarily hit the graziers in their pockets, and is going to appease those of us who really think we should be looking at a range of habitats on that hill.
Yeah. David.
How about a few wind turbines?
Yeah, every time I propose that, people don't seem to be very happy. Was it a serious suggestion?
Well, I just think in this day and age, you know, we have to be realistic that the environment is one thing, and that's fine, but also we all need to switch the lights on. And nobody wants to switch them on from a generating station in their area, but we have a big hill and plenty of wind. No, it's not a serious suggestion, I would think, but.
Well, no, I mean, it's a thought. Nikki?
You mentioned the short-term plan, which is obviously we're talking about the next 12 months, and then you were talking about the longer-term plan. Can you just elaborate on what the longer-term plan is and who will be managing it and you know, how you foresee this longer-term plan evolving? Because as a relative newcomer, just listening to the comments tonight, there's obviously, there are a lot of vested interests, there are a lot of differing opinions, but ultimately, I would have thought there has to be a way that this can be taken forward, which there will be compromise, but it will be a win-win for everybody, or it could be. So I'd just like to understand how this is actually going to be taken forward.
Yeah, you and me both. I think, and that's actually, I think we're looking for suggestions about the method and ideas about the method of how we actually come up with a plan. But the method of how we do it and some input into how we do it. So, you know, we have ideas. We've got, I think we've got an idea from Polly, which is we should allow gorse tums. Now, I'm not quite sure, I'm going to ask Polly in a minute, whether she would like gorse tums everywhere, or whether she's prepared to say, well, I just like a particular area, and you know, if so, how we compromise on that, and whether or not, for example, we can do a rotational system with gorse, which is what I understand the butterfly people would like us to do. They'd like, I mean, with their tunnel vision on butterflies hat on, they will say, well, if you're going to cut any gorse, cut down that mature stuff. And then the graziers say, no, you can't cut down the mature stuff because that's where all the birds are. And I think David Palmer and myself, when we looked at this, and I think Guy Chun would probably agree with us as well, when we looked at this 2 or 3 years ago, we said, well, the problem is, you know, we're not getting on top of this, we're getting gorse tums everywhere. And if we don't do something about it, but Polly takes issue with that.
No,
so,
no, you're not getting gorse tums everywhere, just simply not true. It is simply not true.
It is
true.
true.
It is not true.
Those tums are spreading like bloody wildfire.
You have always had a thing about gorse, David. You've been determined to eradicate from this hill.
Holly,
That's enough.
Can we have, sorry, excuse me, can we have all comments through the chair, please? I don't want people addressing each other, because there obviously are strong views on this guy. What point would you like to make?
Chairman, since most of the village within the moment are here tonight, could we find out what grazing rights each and every one of you have got? And we can then express it as a proportion of the total number of rights on the common. On a very rough take, 4/9 of the grazing rights on the common are in use at the moment. That means roughly half the common could be used for grazing. We had an aborted environmental scheme 2 years ago, which probably boosted that number to near 3/4 of the common. And there was so much secrecy about the way this was managed, you never really got to the bottom of what grazing rights each of the 42 grazing owners of grazing rights have got. So if we could work on a proportion of the people who were perhaps pro a more environmental approach, rotational grazing, regenerative farming or whatever, perhaps that percentage of the common in an appropriate place could be fenced off. We could go to ground farming in a protected areas type scheme, which applies particularly to things like AMPs, and we could then do a bit of an experiment. Obviously, the nature of it would be that the animals would be excludable from that part of the common, and under the aegis of someone like Natural England, there would be seasonal grazing to manage the herbage that grew within those enclosures. Now, obviously, we've got to be careful what we're doing. We've got the intensity of the grazing, the type of animals we do. But the point is, of the 42 people who've got grazing rights, what percentage of the common actually could go down the environmental route?
Well, if I can just, I think that there are some quite major graziers who are not here, but what you're proposing there would be interesting, but it goes against about 8 centuries of case law, because that there's the individual commoner, whether he or she has one right or 1,000 rights, that individual commoner has the right to graze the whole common. I can't see many people here who've got more than 100 rights, you're obviously one of them, and Doug Hayway over there has. I can't immediately see many other people who've got what I would call a substantial number of rights. I can think of people with substantial numbers of rights who are not here. But I'm not sure. I think that's a red herring, because I think I think it's worth exploring, but I don't think we can do that tonight. But by all means, if anybody who has common rights would like to speak to Guy Chumley at the end and say, I am in favour of, fencing off my bit, because it would be lovely if we could all say, I've got 20 rights. Can I have 330ths of the 225 hectares to do what I like with? A lot of commoners would love that, but I think it is legally absolutely impossible. We find ourselves in a difficult situation, and I don't think that's actually going to get us anywhere. But what I do think we do, coming back to Nikki's question, and John raised it as well, really, which is how can we have a peaceful committee, a peaceful conference, brainstorming session. How can we do this to try and find a way? I think it may take. Committees don't often work, because if you get somebody who is very keen on gorse, for example, on that committee, and somebody who hates gorse, then you will end up eventually with an unworkable committee. And we have people who love bracken and who want more bracken. We have people who don't want trees planted, as you're aware. We had some problems about that earlier. And there are people who don't want us to control bracken, with some good reasons. I mean, flood retention and also carbon sequestration as well. The jury's out on that. I had an argument with Polly myself because I made a claim that the carbon sequestered by the bracken goes back into the atmosphere, and she challenged me to find.
Well, I only asked if you could supply research documentation.
Yeah, and you're still waiting, aren't you? Yes.
Still waiting.
Yes, my source wasn't able to come up with one. But the problem is that when we get people, in a room, it doesn't really work. And I don't know what the answer to this is, but I think that we have to get the views of people as to how we could move in a long-term direction, and then the parish council has to come up with something. We all know the expression, "a camel is a horse designed by a committee," and the larger the committee, the worse the shape of the animal that gets designed. So I think what we want is ideas tonight, and views, because in a minute I know, or perhaps not in a minute, but I am going to ask for a show of hands about what people are generally in favour of and what they're not, so that the parish council can consider that, and whether or not we do something about this year with the proposals that were made by the Commoners Association, but what we do more to the point into the future. I think we are all more interested in solving a long-term issue. I think we are making some progress this year in that we are doing more mechanical control and less spraying, but we need to do much more, and I think Polly has made that point and several people agree. John?
Like I said, we need to do much more. I think the problem is that people have got big ideas, and those big ideas oppose. Personally, I think the only way we're going to make progress is slowly and incrementally. And my suggestion would be, you accept the status quo, what are the pluses and minuses of it? We have the status quo, which is the way it is at the moment. And then we try and change things incrementally. I would actually support Polly's proposal that we try something, a certain amount of course, and see what happens. But that would be it. We wouldn't be doing a lot of other things. And in a couple of years' time, we could review it and we could see what would be the next step. But our experience so far is that we try and make big changes, we just don't get there. Small changes we might stand more chance of. It doesn't materially adversely affect the income of the graziers on the hill, and they may be prepared to accept a small change. And I think over a period of time, we then may make the bigger change, but we will not make the bigger change by trying to do it in one go.
Very true.
And we could also, we talk about the goals, we could perhaps have, you talk about the 5%, have a small area where you're looking at the gorse, and another area where you're looking at the acid grassland, and have a small piece of that as well, to see whether.
You mean fenced off?
Fenced off,
Yeah.
so that we can have a look at where it's protected and allowed to thrive. It is protected, but not huge amounts, because obviously we've got the graziers, and that would set up difficulties, should I say, but 2 small areas, and just monitor those and just see what happens, and then come back to it and look.
Yeah, I have, when we have observed, Doug fenced off an area of acid grassland to see what happened. I think the problem is we didn't, well, it all started and then lockdown happened, and as a result, we couldn't get a group of people. We wanted to get people from Natural England and the Wildlife Trust and so on to come and look and perhaps do a scientific. I mean, we could obviously have done the site. We have enough people here with the correct kind of credentials to do some kind of scientific survey, although we probably need some outside ecologists as well. But so it didn't happen in a scientific way. But my impression is that I have found, this may be greeted by scepticism in some quarters, but I have found that some of the graziers are actually very keen on seeing what happens, because they believe their narrative, and they're happy to fence off a bit and tell you what they think is going to happen, and they're happy to learn if it doesn't. And yes, we could do that. I'm not quite sure how big an area we would need to do on the gorse tumps. I mean, I should add that the idea was we did do a little bit of treatment on the left-hand side of the Stone Road of the gorse tumps, and the idea was to not do any treatment this year on that. So we were going to let those regenerate effectively, or we not die. That was the proposal from the graziers, in fact. That we weren't going to treat, that those gorse tumps were.
Have we finished talking about possible proportionality of all this? We want to talk about gorse, we'll talk about gorse, but it would be jolly helpful to know what grazing rights the people here have got. We would then know what percentage of the common possibly would be of interest to go into an environmental scheme. We could then get to the Council of Natural England and anybody else who's actually got some knowledge of the subject, perhaps can talk to us about it. So if you get in touch with me, that would be great.
Is that going to satisfy you on that issue? I'm happy to come up and tell you at the end of it, if I could remember how many commons rights I've got. I'd be happy to tell you that, and happy to tell you what I'm in favour of. Joe?
I know that Doug, a few years ago, fenced off a little bit of acid grass.
Yeah.
And you have already said that COVID came along and nothing has happened since. Why can't that be redone and people can then go and have a look and see what happens when grass is just left to grow? That was number one. Number two is biodiversity is already going on the hill, because a few years ago, and I was it last year, we had 110 or was it 200 and something trees planted on the hill, which should, if they had all taken, be providing more biodiversity for birds and insects and everything else. And what is the council going to do about the ones that didn't take? Because I have a feeling there were quite a lot, and that's a pity.
Can I just answer, or are you going to answer that?
I was just going to say, certainly in our area, from the gate, from the Yard Gate up to Green Shutters, Polly, Lucy and I have been monitoring the trees, and we've been going through them all, and any that are dead. We got trees from Guy last week, and Polly and I potted up, whatever it was, 70 of them, 50 into pots to get them stronger, because one of the problems is that they were literally wicks.
Oh, they were tiny, tiny.
So we're trying to get some good root base. So that's what we did last week, to plant them, get them strong, so that, and I've marked with red spray, rather sort of unsightly little red dots, the ones that have survived and that are growing. We tested them all, and then so that we know which needs to be replaced.
Of course.
So that was, if that helps.
80% survival rate.
Yeah, so, but they're tiny. I mean, a few have grown beyond the protection.
Yeah, okay, we had problems with sheep putting those out, and we think we've addressed that with the difference.
Yeah, so we're
Rob.
on it.
It seems very evident to me that its proportionality is the concept that Guy's talking about in terms of commons rights or whatever, John is suggesting in terms of polyhedral areas, and Polly is talking about in terms of trying different things. So all of these are, the common ground is proportionality. Is it not possible that here tonight, that we might expect or hope or devise a proportion? So in other words, what size of land mass, not necessarily defining where that land mass is, what proportion is acceptable to the owner to set aside for, let's call it experimentation? What proportion, in other words, that's either a physical area or a proportion of the common, or a method of devising that proportion? Because everything is going around in a circle and nobody knows where and what can happen. So can you, or are you prepared, or can we vote for a proportion that could be set aside for the study?
Yeah, so for example, I mean, that's a relatively easy one. Let's just say, right, is there anybody who feels that more than 10% of the common, so the common, just to refresh everybody's memory, the common is approximately 225 hectares, that's 570 acres. So 10%, for example, of the common would be 57 acres, 22 hectares. Does anyone feel that, or hands up if you feel that 10% of the common we should be able to experiment with it, fence it off, see what happens in various different areas. So we'll try 10%, 5%, 1%. And see what everybody thinks.
Sorry, I don't understand what that's going to achieve, because what the owner wants to do
Yeah.
is only a very small part.
Yeah.
The key criteria.
But Guy's point, and I'm humouring him because we're always telling him he can't have what he wants. But what I'm humouring him here, I'm saying, supposing the owner had the power, which it doesn't, but supposing we did, and supposing the graziers would agree, who here amongst the electorate of the owner actually feels that, say, we should do 10%? And does anybody feel we should do 10% of the common? So at least 10%.
Oh, at least, yes.
Yeah, well, put your hand up if you want to. I'll come to you later. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 13 think at least 10%. Who thinks less than 5%? I've got one there, and I'm going to take. No, it's not.
But you're raising people's expectations.
No, I'm not raising anybody's expectations. So, does anybody? Would anybody be? Is there anybody of those who feel that only a very small? Is there anybody who feels that none of the common should be fenced off for experimentation purposes? And we're talking like, a few square meters. I mean, you've already fenced off a few square meters.
Yeah, well, I fenced a bit off already.
Yeah.
It's still
Would you be happy to do a few more bits?
experiment off.
Yeah. Would you be happy, Doug, to do a few more bits?
Would you like to see more bits fenced off, Doug?
No, I wouldn't.
Just the one.
Yeah.
Okay. David.
Having looked after the hill, what people perhaps don't realise is in my old money, there's 500 acres up there, but there's only 150 acres that we have ever treated. So basically, a third of the hill is what has been bracken controlled, sprayed occasionally, crushed, and this, that, and the other. So you do have 2/3 of the hill that's never been interfered with at all.
Then overgrows.
Yeah, okay, apart from the fact that, as Polly points out, it has been great.
Yes.
It's been great, but it hasn't been mechanically interfered with.
Sure.
And with the best will in the world, the conservationists would quite like to see it working controlled. It's not just a case of fence off tent of the common as it turns into jungle. It will still be managed, but it will be managed in a different way. The important thing is the seasonality of the thing, so that poor flowering plants can actually have a chance to fly. The conservationists do not want to bracken and blanket because it's extremely limiting of biodiversity. We would just like to have a go and experiment. Unless you know the proportionality of what our villagers think about it, with their interests on the common, you've got nothing to take to the farming and protected landscape scheme for fencing in the interest of habitat restoration, or have a sensible conversation with an advisor from Natural England who has done this many, many times before in other areas without any problem at all. But here it seems to be impossible.
If we could, well, I think one thing I would say, Guy, is that it is very difficult when you have commoners, individual commoners, who have rights, and those rights are, that they're not subject, except in special circumstances. They don't have to be democratically settled. It can be totally anarchic because individual commoners can do whatever they like. But if I can just answer what the point John was making about is this raising expectations. I don't believe it is, but I do think there is something that we can do. We have voted on a budget that David doesn't approve of, which basically said we were going to put effectively £3,000 into bracken control. Now, we don't have to do that. It is something that is a bargaining chip. So I'm not saying we would do that, but the parish council can go to the Commoners Association and say, look, we want a couple of little experimental areas fenced off, and we think you owe us because we're putting all this money towards bracken control. And there are other things as well. We have some bargaining chips, they have some bargaining chips. It's a negotiation. So there are things that we can do. The question is, is there some meaningful way in which we could get a little bit of what if I say the non-commoners and the ecologically minded non-grazing commoners want, because a lot of people here, such as Guy, such as yourself, are actually, and such as Polly Bolton and others here, are actually very keen on ecological issues, and they all have grazing rights. It's just that they don't exercise them. There are a certain number of grazing rights here. In fact, again to humour Guy, but for interest, does anybody want to admit to, say, having 50 rights or above? I'll admit to that. Guy will admit to that.
Why we say that? Yes, I do. But
because Guy would like to thump the table in the Commoners Association committee and say, look, I was at a meeting and there are all these people, and between them they had 500 rights, and they all want to do something about this.
That right is to graze the hill. It is
Yeah.
not to graze a proportion of the hill, and that's the fundamental problem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, I'm not having a go at you, but just listening to this discussion, there seems to be an awful lot of talk about people thumping the table. I can't really see that that's going to achieve very much at all. Surely you have, to simplify, you have sort of almost two conflicting groups, if you like. You have the graziers, and then you have the people who would like to see some of the keep a little bit more environmentally friendly. At the end of the day, isn't the only way you're going to come up with a workable solution is actually to get people talking together to actually say what they would like, because somewhere along the line, surely there must be some sort of compromise on this.
Broadly speaking, I think within the parish council, that compromise does exist. We have a bit of a problem now because the Commoners Association Committee has some firebrands on it who weren't on until quite recently. If I just say somebody who considers themselves to be the official opposition to the parish council is now on the Commoners Association Committee. And so we are getting some lack of cooperation, which I think we have now fixed, or temporarily. For example, the Commoners Association Committee briefly said they didn't want us to plant any more trees. They didn't want us to plant these 70 juniper trees. By being cooperative and not thumping the table, we sorted out that problem and we planted the trees. And I'm quite sure we can achieve various things as well. But you know, you have to have your negotiating position, and you have to have a few bargaining chips. And we do have a few bargaining chips. Those who are ecologically minded do have some bargaining chips. I mean, I have to say, we're painting it as if it's two opposing camps. In my experience, the actual active graziers are quite ecologically minded. Now, there may be laughter from, cynical laughter from some corners of the world, but they are not all evil and wanting to, to destroy all the ecology on the common. But obviously, they have their livelihoods to think of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's quite problematic on occasions. Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to agree with David Palmer and say that possibly we could try balancing the books a little better by not using any algae locks on the hill, especially up here, where the water rises to the whole of the structure.
Yeah.
And I just think, we could save a lot of money. I do think that we've done amazingly with the railway Hutchinson and Crusher. And I think it's working really well. I think it's working better than any of the ones.
Okay, well, rather than have a debate on that, noting that it is weed whiting, not spraying, and so there's the very different, the runoff into the water table is very much less. But let's just ask the question. Those who would like there to be no chemical control at all on the Clew Liberty, I'm going to get a show of hands in a minute, but I will just make one point, which is there are certain areas where you cannot control the bracken effectively without every few years, I think in my model it's about every 7 years. If you take a bit of a bit of dense bracken and you put azulette locks on it, either spray or weed white, that will knock it back, and in 7 years' time it'll get back to where it was. So it lasts about 7 years, whereas the mechanical methods last 2 or 3. The more you do it.
It's still not licensed for weed wiping. I know you brushed that under the table.
No, that's been fixed. It's happened all over Wales. It is legal. It is legal.
It's borderline legal. It's not been licensed for weed wiping. It's been licensed in very special areas where people have put so much pressure on.
Yeah.
It's not good. It's not right that it's legal.
No, that's not right. Weed wiping is much better than spraying. The only reason that they haven't licensed it is because these chemical approvals cost a huge amount of money. And so hardly anybody wanted to use weed wiping as a method, so they didn't spend the money. That's why. It's not because it's more dangerous than spraying. It's less.
No, I didn't say that.
No, but it's not. It's not. I mean, we all know no chemicals is best.
They tried to ban it totally, and we brought it back. I mean, it's not licensed in most
Yeah,
So,
okay, well,
I mean, it's
yeah,
not
okay, but it's not as bad as Craig.
Well, it's not as bad as nuclear,
Yeah.
bomb or whatever.
Sorry, David, I know you did, David's hand, I'll come to you next with it. David.
Just for information, I'm not sure everyone knows, but basically, if you weed wipe with Agilox, you use half the amount that you do when you spray. So it is, regardless of whether it's approved or isn't approved, it's half the amount of chemical
Okay,
to achieve the same result.
Philip,
But are you saying then that its benefit is it doesn't get washed away? Because everything, like you say, everything up there, that's the source of the water that goes to everybody else in the vicinity, right? So from the, it's mental. It seems mental to me that anyone would consider using chemicals at the source of the areas of water. That is crazy, right?
okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
But my point is, so you're saying that this is better because it stays on the hill longer.
No, I'm actually saying, no, I'm not, I'm saying it's better because you use less,
Yeah.
and you don't get runoff into the water courses in the same way that you do with spray. Now, I do not know what happens chemically when you put Agilox on a plant. I don't believe it finds its way as Agilox into the water supply, but I don't know. I'm not the apologist for this. The Commoners Association wish to use some Agilox, so it's not me who's proposing, it's Polly.
Can you assure us that you will never again leave those awful black channels, straight lines, which I believe are, the subject of much controversy? Those dreadful, just bare stripes that we've got in Kolkata. That is the most terrible way to manage anything.
I can't make any such assurance, but I would certainly not be in favour of that, yeah.
It looks awful. It has been commented on by a number of, environmental organisations.
Okay, Ruby.
Just coming back to what happens to chemicals once you spray them onto plants. I think there are several concerns. One is contamination of water supplies. Another is contamination and injury to, say, insects that land on them and take that up as they touch a plant that's been treated. And the other way, which is very significant and long-term, is when it enters the food chain in various different formats. And I think that should be a great concern to all of us. Because what is happening all over it, I think we all know this, is that toxic levels of these things are building up and up and up and up. And they do stay around for a long time. Now, I don't know Agilox particularly, but I'm very happy to find out if that helps.
Well, the Parish Council will be discussing this at its next meeting. If you find any research on Agilox and its long-term effects in the various, the chain of, obviously, I don't think anything eats the bracken, so, but, yeah.
Well,
Okay,
I
I
think
suppose
it
the
does,
insects,
it does, because the bracken decays, it forms like a leaf mold type of thing. That's broken down by microorganisms, worms, etc.
Okay,
This is
well,
how
if you
it's
find some research, the Parish Council would be interested.
Well, I think the point is, and I think this is a very important point, is that all of us should try, as far as possible, to be evidence-driven on this. Obviously, passions run high, and that's important as well. But we need to take into account where there is evidence. We need to take into account what's been done in other similar areas and learn from there how they've worked these things out.
Okay, David.
I thought our water supply came from a reservoir of Peckerwood.
That's a tap supply rather than a light supply.
Main supply.
Really?
Well, my point is, I don't think our water supply comes from off the hill.
Our water supply doesn't, somebody's might do.
It's the water that's
We had a guy from Slow Flow on the meeting, and he was saying, you know, the whole reason he come here is because this is the source of the water, and that, you know, this whole area.
Well,
here.
I'm not a
So
geography.
just that we don't drink it ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, everything.
No, Philip, I don't think we can have a geography lesson here, but I think the rain falls on the entire country. I don't think any more rain falls on this bit that we're planning to put a bit of azulocks on, or that's been proposed. But you know, yes. All the water in the water table.
The entire hill is where all the water comes out. It only comes, it doesn't come in the valley, you don't get water coming out in the valley, comes out the top of the hill. Source of all water, we're in the highest hill in Shropshire.
Yeah, but
so we've got most of the water rising here, and we're poisoning it, which seems crazy. But for what? I mean, for what? For a couple of sheep. And we're doing it for farming. It's commercial farming we're doing it for. We're not doing it, it looks evil or poisoning.
No,
we're doing it for
sorry,
farming.
I won't accept that.
We're
not doing it for
We're doing it for
farming.
someone else. We're not doing it.
No, we're not doing it for farming. No, we're not. Well,
We're doing it for dairy.
Jasper, let me explain what we are, why we control Bracken. That is because if we didn't control it, our asset, the entire hill, would be covered in Bracken. We do. It would be covered in Bracken on some kind of timescale. If you just leave it,
it wouldn't. It doesn't. It doesn't do that.
Well, it was 10 years ago.
It changes.
Well, that's not something that anybody is going to agree
Where
on.
else is just totally overrun with Bracken?
What the Wales, the Welsh hills, Welsh mountains.
They are all over place.
They've done huge. They've done huge amounts of
That's a
Bracken.
sheep thing again.
But let's not go into that. Let's just simply, can I have a show of hands? How many people here would like there to be no chemical treatment on Clee Liberty this year? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is not binding, but the parish council would like to know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and how many people feel that there should be limited spraying of chemical on Clee Liberty this year?
We think spraying.
Sorry, weed wiping. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think that's 12. It's roughly 50-50. I mean, we're not going to say, oh, it's 12, 11, somebody's 1. It just shows that there's a good spread of opinion on the subject, and we will look at that at our next meeting and decide whether the compromise Commoners Association have made is enough or not. Because last year we used 3 barrels of azulocks. In the past we've used more than that. Last year it was 3. This year it would be proposed to use 2. No, 2. It was 2 this year.
No, you said.
That's good,
Yeah, it is great. Sorry, I thought you said 3.
I do really, I think the crushing is brilliant.
Okay. The parish council will decide at its next meeting whether or not the reduction from 3 to 2 is sufficient. What about the mechanical control? Is everybody happy about the mechanical? Apart from Polly, you made the point about the gorse.
Well, are you going to use mechanical or chemical?
On the gorse, mechanical.
Mechanical?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, certainly on the Bracken, not on the yellow, which is the area on this community, it's been very successful.
It was proposed to not do anything except a little bit of crushing. The Yells, we were proposing to do nothing. Well, like I said, the Commoners Association proposed doing nothing.
Just a wee observation. I have noticed with the bracken, it kind of needs 2 lots of road. Because what happens is the first lot comes up and then that gets, as you know, if you bend bracken, it dies back down.
Yeah.
And I've really noticed then there's a second, if not third flush. And it, I don't know finance-wise, but there's an area by Green Shutters which we have symptomatically been scything. I'm not suggesting that, I'm just saying, and it does seem to control if you go at it again, but just the once is effective, but it's not the same
Well,
as.
Mr. Chair, we did initially, when the bracken cutting started in way back when, we did a twice cut. And that kind of kick-started the process to control the strength of the growth.
Yeah, that's.
And I think that needs to be possibly rolled out to other first cut areas.
Okay. David?
The problem with the bracken, if you're going to do it with a one roll, you've got to wait until it's mature enough. If you push down with your foot, it sort of clicks,
Yeah.
and you can tell. And what myself and Paul have done over the years is you wait until about the end of June, early July, and then you do get a pretty effective crush. If you do it too early, it just pings down and bends up. But obviously commercially, you know, I mean, in the times I was involved, we've been spending about 2,500 on bracken. And to double that is obviously excessive. I mean, obviously it will be better, but effectively, if you wait till the right time, you do get a reasonable result for your money. But obviously, it's what you want to spend. You know?
Okay, well, that point's been taken on board. Any other points that anybody wants to make about crushing and robo-cutting? The robo-cutting, for those, Guy, would you like to explain what the robo-cutter does? Because I think you probably know more than anybody else here.
Well, it goes back to the physics related to natural order. So if you can break up the bracken mat, you will be the saviour of us all, because it will give the other plants a chance to grow. So we ended up with a pedestrian operated robo-cutter, that's the meter a bit wide. It was used, or introduced to local authorities to worry about the dangers to string up operators on steep banks. So you use the thing with a sort of PlayStation controller, and it will go anywhere on the common. There is no bracken on the common that you can't cut. In the use I've had with this and Rob here, we got right down into the bracken mat, and it was very interesting to look at the 2 areas that were done last summer to see how effective it has been, because we went into absolutely virgin territory up the patches. And we got right down into the mat, and this summer it seems to be coming out with grass. So on a larger scale, the Upland Commons project provided a 3 metre wide plough machine at the same time to go behind John Hayway's tractor. And John is to be encouraged to try and use this thing more, because I'm absolutely convinced that if you do break through into the bracken patch, we are going to do a lot of good with it. If we just use it to cut the bracken on the surface, it'll be like in the days when they went up there with a thing called a jungle buster, which was just neat chains, and all the residue from the cut was just left to stash, and year upon year it just built up and built up and built up. The question that has got to be asked is, actually, is the plough machine a far better tool than the bracken crusher. And in my own opinion, I think if we started from scratch, that's the way we've done it. We would have used a lot of diesel, and we'd have to have some fairly brave machine operators. But I really don't think that just rolling bracken and rolling bracken and rolling bracken does anything more than to create a black asphalt layer of carbonised material, for want of a better, through which the poor old grass is valiantly trying to poke. So it's really an experiment we did last year. We need to follow what we did last year, and I guess that will shape the policy in the future, particularly if you don't want us to go and use herbicides.
Okay. Yes, Helen.
I'm not hugely knowledgeable about doing things, but listening to what's being said, if we're trying to, as a starting point, keep the same amount of grazing, and people are wanting to maintain more gorse, should we be looking at getting rid of more bracken, focusing on the bracken more than the gorse, so that you leave approximately the same amount of grazing? Would that be better biodiversity-wise? This is just picking up on what people have said, maybe knowledge. Is that maybe something we should?
I totally agree, because it's all very well planting a few trees, that's lovely, but you need different layers. You need scrub, you need ground cover, you've got to have a sort of matrix of habitats in order to promote biodiversity. And like I say, when I sit lying at the gorse clumps, and it's amazing the amount of life. If you want skylarks and yellowhammers and linnets and things that feed on insects, we're going to have these habitats.
Okay. Rob, do you want to say something?
I was going to say that having driven the road a couple of lot, the thing about the downside of it is that the area that we can cover within a time is incredibly small. It's hardly larger than a domestic lawnmower, and it moves at about the same sort of speed. So the amount that you can cover when you're looking at, obviously, in terms of areas and plants, just looking at when you put on the map and the areas that are marked out there, I find we would need it for an incredible amount of time, and it would need other people qualified to do it. At the moment, I think it's just the guy himself. And in terms of time scales, just to cover that area marked on the map, I think we probably
so
looking at weeks.
You think that's going to be quite ambitious?
I think that would be impossible.
Okay. Philip, do you want to say something?
Is there an actual grazing management thing at all? Is it managed at all, or is it just a complete free for all? We know we need to get them up there now and whatever. Is there actually a?
There are no. The custom here in Peace and Margaret is that the Lord of the Manor has not, in living memory of anybody or their grandparents, imposed any restriction. In some commons, there are restrictions. The problem is that that is down to local custom. And although it is possible to get something like that organised, you actually have to have consent from the graziers to form what's called Commons Council, which can then have a democratic arrangement, and commoners' rights can be restricted. However, getting that, I believe some of our number looked into that, and it's incredibly difficult to get it going. I think it's probably even more difficult than than getting a environmental scheme degree. But basically, anybody who has grazing rights can put animals up there any time of year.
Anywhere, any time of year.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of legal restrictions on putting fences up, because this was all to basically protect the free men of the village from the evil Lord of the Manor. And now, of course, it's a very different story. Polly,
Dare I mention the elephant in the room? Supplementary feeding.
you dare, yes, but
Well, that's never actually been resolved. I mean, it has it. It's never been kicked down the road.
well, I don't know if there's sufficient appetite to, I mean, just to start with, just to explain to everybody, just in case people don't know what this is, the supplementary feeding is the practice whereby graziers can leave their animals on the common in the winter when there isn't any grass and feed them. And ecologists tend not to like it because the claim is that it provides too much nutrition on the common and it destroys acid grassland. Having said that, when we had some ecological experts from Natural England and Shropshire Wildlife Trust, they agreed that there was quite a lot of acid grassland on the common. So the counterclaim from the graziers and from those in favour of supplementary feeding is that those nutrients just simply leach away, providing other problems later on in the water table, but basically it doesn't keep the acid grassland. But yeah, there is, if the parish council wanted a fight with the graziers, it can attempt to stop them from supplementary feeding. But I haven't detected any major appetite for doing that. Does anybody else want to? I mean, I imagine probably you are of the ecological persuasion that supplementary feeding is bad.
No, not really, but I think it's I was thinking of the RPA payments that is in contravention of the
I think, well, we've had arguments about this before and we don't think it is.
I don't think it is.
Well, my reading of the RPA manuals was that it wasn't in contravention. But other people had a different view. But if you can find a regulation that it's contravening, then I'd love to know.
Well, I think the thing about the supplementary feeding is that it depends where it is. It can be quite a useful tool for crushing bracken if it's moved around a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us, I know my son-in-law has dragged hay up there in a snowstorm because he's not so sorry for them.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us want to see starving sheep up there in the terribly harsh weather that we can get sometimes. But I just, as an aid to bracken crushing, it becomes quite useful possibly.
And just backing up what he said, just by us, Jonesy has started using the feeders there, and I've really noticed that it's really crushing the bracken down really well.
Yes.
So maybe an idea would be that each year it's in a different place.
Yeah,
It's actually extraordinary how I can see for the first time in 9 years, bare earth. I mean, it's winter, but I haven't seen that before because, as you know, by us it's incredibly dense. So actually, as what he said, maybe that could be an instrument.
We haven't
by
given,
moving the feeders to more dense.
we do tend to find that those Jonty sheep, Jonty is very receptive
to
to
moving around.
he's very receptive to any bad feeling or criticism.
Oh no, I'm not criticising. I'm suggesting it's a good thing, but if it was moved around.
No, but when he makes a mess or when he leaves it there too long, when he uses too heavy machinery, basically we get on to him if people tell us about it, and he is usually very receptive, because obviously in the area, in his sort of heft, he has less obvious places to do that, and so we have.
I think it's doing really well when he's meeting now. I think it's doing really well.
Okay. I need to draw this item to a close soon. David, you had one.
Oh, I was just going to agree with you.
Yeah.
That, where Doug has had his sheet and left to the Stone Road, he has crushed an awful lot of that
Yeah.
as well. And if you move the feed around, it's very effective.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's
Yeah,
fantastic.
don't get Doug started, or we'll have the half hour.
Just drop him over.
But, okay, are there any other points that I think? Yeah, we were being polite about you, Doug. I think what I'm going to say, what I'm going to say is parish council, all those members who are here, which I think is everybody, we have heard what's been said, and this will be discussed in the short term, or for the short term, which Ian Hayway will be organising for this year, and in the longer term, we will come up with perhaps some proposals that might make some people a bit happier. But I think we have to get the Commoners Association on side. I think there are quite a few people here from the Commoners Association Committee, and those people can also report back to the Commoners Association. Scarlett.
I just wanted to clarify, and it's going back to John's question about the right mechanism to get things moving incrementally. So what I'm hearing is that we've taken the views of the people here tonight, and then we as a parish council will come back with some proposals. So what I wanted to be clear on is there is no other proposal in the room because I know at one point there was a management group, wasn't there, which I understand wasn't terribly successful. So there is no other appetite in the room to try and reinstate some sort of committee, as you called it, or management group or anything. This does seem to be the best way forward.
Yeah, you get no point for that suggestion.
No, it's not a suggestion, it's not at all. I just want to check that everyone's happy with the way we're going to be going forward. John, you're happy with that, please? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, what else have we got on this agenda? I think that was one of the main items. If we can, right, these should be relatively simple. Now, in lockdown, we did try an experiment of streaming parish council meetings, and we made it where we are streaming this one if it's worked. And I think that the clerk is at home listening. But what do people think in general? Would people appreciate? We have some people who turn up regularly to our parish council meetings, where they can have their say at the beginning, and if there are experts who would like to hear from, the chair can bring them in and does from time to time. But would people be interested in parish council meetings as a matter of course being streamed so that you could see it live on YouTube or after the event? If anybody would be interested in that, either say something or put your hand up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so there's quite a few people here who are interested in that. Okay, we will consider that. There is just one, there is one contrary item. We don't know who's listening. The parish councillors have to be quite careful what they say if they don't know who's listening. We're not routinely rude about anybody.
That's a good thing.
But
You have to be careful.
well, maybe it is, yes. We're never rude about you. Okay, we'll take that on board. Introduction of Parish Council email communication. Now, Ruby's been badgering about this for years, and the clerk tells me that in the other 3 parish councils that she serves as clerk in, they do not have the money to do a mailing out to the entire parish because in most cases their parishes have many more electors and they don't have as much money as we do. So they don't send out anything. They just put things on notice boards, they put things on websites, and in some cases they have an email list. Now, what we have, we've got an experimental email list that we've set up that people can join, following the instructions on the bottom of the agenda. What do people think about us phasing out paper communication? Obviously, we have some people in the parish who don't have email. I can think of at least 2. David, do you have one about this?
Yeah, I do personally, and so does Joe, have an objection to communications turning up addressed to a parishioner. We all have names, and we can all use email, but please don't put 80p stamps on envelopes addressed to a parishioner. It's so informal or formal, and it really shouldn't be.
So you mean we've got to have a more intelligent mail merge?
No, all we need is either your name or an email, but please don't. In this small community,
we will
not
take,
our
we will take it on board, but the parish council is actually subject to GDPR regulations, and the clerk was not keen that we should have named addressees, that we should keep a record, matter of course, of named addressees.
Well, the previous clerk managed it for 15 years without getting prosecuted.
Well, yeah, but you know, GDPR is an evil we have to cope with. But no, I've taken your point, Ruby.
Right, can I just clarify for myself, how many minutes? On the bottom of the agenda, there's 2 different things here. One is a Google group for the dissemination of parish council news and information. So presumably you can put into that Google group the minutes or the agenda or whatever. People can go to that Google group and they can look at it.
Well, no, they would get an email.
They would get an email saying what?
Well, whatever the parish council sends out. It's an email list, effectively. If you
So
join...
it's not a Google group?
Yeah, it is a Google group.
It's like a digital one.
Yeah.
Where you just get
Google, there's more than one
So
type
it's
of
a
Google group.
mail managing system run by Google?
Yeah.
Right, that's what I was trying to, because there is something else called Google Groups,
Yeah, no,
which
this
is
is
different again.
Yeah, no, this is Google Groups. You can also go and look at, you don't have to be signed up to receive emails. You can go and look at the threads on
Yes.
the internet.
So I just think we need clarity if, as I suspect, you're about to invite people here to say what they might like,
Yeah.
that they understand that there could be a difference between going and looking at something that's static and receiving emails.
Yeah. Yes, that's it is. We did. It's the Police and Margaret Parish Council mailing list. That's the group that you're invited to join. So it is a mailing list, but there are also options for you to go and see the emails, because you can kind of opt out of the email. But it's the problem is Google Groups is a very powerful thing. But what we are proposing here is an email list. So instead of, and this is the question, we set up the thing, and if nobody uses it, we'll throw it away. But the question we wanted to ask the assembled company is, should we continue sending out paper notifications in general to people who don't join the group, or alternatively, should we just stop sending out mail altogether? Because we put things on notice boards. Joe?
What I would say is the paper being sent out to individuals, don't bother, but make sure all the information is on all 6 notice boards in the village.
Okay. Have you seen examples where it isn't?
Pardon?
Have you seen examples where the information is not on all 6?
Yes, it's not in Colweston. Sometimes it appears from the notice board in Yeld. The Field House notice board quite often loses its notices. So I think if all 6 notice boards have received the paper copies, then fine. If then somebody who is a troublemaker wishes to remove them from one of the notice boards, well, so be it, but at least 5 have got all the information.
Yeah, no, that does happen. All 6 notice boards do get populated with all of the notices.
And the website.
And the website does as well. Ruby?
Whilst I take Joan's point, perhaps just remind her that there may be people in our community who don't have internet and are not physically able to get out to notice board. So from my position, I would suggest that it's a matter of opting into systems. So if you opt in to an email notification list, you don't then get paper.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems like the most sensible way forward. But anybody who hasn't opted into that list, they continue to get paper copies. I'm concerned about it only being the notice boards because I'm not convinced everyone can get to see the notice boards. I'm not saying, I do still do the notice boards, yes, but.
If people can't get out and they don't have internet, then I suppose it's nice for them to know what's going on. But
They're probably going to be quite hungry as well.
well, maybe people bring them food. I mean, there are people with mobility issues, obviously. Okay, thank you for that. And I noticed lots of nodding around the place. So people generally tended to agree that people should continue. So this is the proposal that people will continue to receive paper if they don't opt into the email list. Can I have a show of hands for everybody who thinks that's a good idea? Yeah, that's almost everybody. Thank you. Okay, finally, Sue Cale points out, and I believe, I think we're now down to, is it 3 or 4 volunteers? 3. We need more volunteers for the defibrillator rapid response. So, and just in case there's anybody who isn't up with this, several years ago, we obtained 3 defibrillators for the village. There's one in Colchester at Guy's house, there's one in Boxshut in the old telephone box, there's one in the centre of the village. And we have a telephone system whereby if somebody in the village or within a reasonable range of those 3 defibrillators, somebody called 999, the ambulance service knows that those defibrillators are here, and it calls a computerized number system, and then the people on the rapid response are telephoned basically in a random order, I think, and then you don't have to, but basically the volunteer has the option of responding or not. So if they've had, half a bottle of wine or something, they might not respond, or if they're not in, or whatever. And then the telephone dial will go on to the next person. So that's the point of the rapid response team. And Rob is a member, Sue Cale's a member, and who else have we got?
It's Len.
Len Matthews. We need more people. Those people would get training. There will be some training courses anyway. Who should people contact? If Sue Cale was here, I'd say see Sue Cale. Can they see
I think
you?
she's taken that on board. The simple matter about it is that even without training, it is the most simple thing to operate. Everything's on the outside, and it tells you what to do. As you unwrap each piece, it tells you where to push it. The point is that if you can get to somebody within about half an hour, you stand a chance of saving their life. If you take longer than half an hour, the chances are virtually zero. So it gives them a fighting chance, and that's the way I can expect in that sense.
So anybody who is interested in joining that team, anybody who is interested in defibrillator and basically CPR training, because it's CPR plus defibrillator, you can have the training without being in the group. Anybody is interested, please contact Sue Cale or Rob, and we will make sure that you get an invitation to the next course, which we will cover. We really tend to publicise these things on TV anyway. Okay, thanks for that. Item number 9, any other business apart from the fact that it's cold and late? Anything that anybody would like to raise for next agenda or for Parish Council in general?
On the Parish Council, next agenda, a proposal from a number of members of the community who attended a meeting to discuss and make plans for the Jubilee celebrations.
Right, yeah.
Which are the weekend of the 4th and 5th of June. On Thursday, the 2nd of June, there will be a national lighting of beacon fires around the country. And that was seen by the people who attended the community meeting to be something that they were very keen that we would be involved in.
Okay.
However, it was felt that people from the community were not in a position to organise that, given the issues about accessing common insurance and so on. So we would like, on behalf of that group, I'd like to put a formal proposal that the parish council organise the lighting of the beacon, and that would be enthusiastically supported by the community.
Okay. Yes, that's right, because then it can be covered by our insurance. Yeah. I think David Farmer organised the last one, so we might be asking him for his memories of the subject.
We're getting on our narrow boat to Liverpool at that point.
Yeah, well, you weren't, but you are now.
There is a WI conference and I have no option.
Could Joan take the boat on her own? Okay. Any other issues that anybody would like? Thank you.
Just parish plan. I just wondered how we're getting on with the parish plan. As suggested by Cecilia and Motley at one of the meetings the other day.
Oh, well, we tried.
St Margaret hasn't done a parish plan for
10 years.
Yeah, we try and put her off every time she suggests it. You would like a parish, you would like a revised parish plan.
Well, I just wondered, because...
Now, the main thing about these things is they were originally designed to be community-led plans. And the purpose of that was simply that there are a lot of frustrated electors in many large parishes. So if you have a parish with, like 2,000 people in it, as you might have, or a town, the council does not always very adequately reflect the desires of ordinary people. And so the idea of the parish plan was to try and find people who are not on the parish council. But the problem is we've got 7 councillors serving 120 electors. So we actually, a large proportion of the people, there's only a limited pool of people in the village who are happy to do things. So if we can find people, you know, who aren't on the village or committee and the parish council and the Commonwealth Association committee and the you know, Church PCC and WI, if we can find people, other people, who actually want to join in this and take an initiative, and we did find some people last time, Guy and Karen were main moves in it, and John Bell and one or two others. If we can find people who actually want to take it forward and revise the parish plan, then by all means, if you wish to volunteer, then let us know, because I think we want people who are prepared to put in the effort. And it did take, you worked very hard, you two, last time. It was a lot of meetings, a lot of stuff in between.
But you enjoyed it so much you like to do it again. I'll just write that down.
What we need is Jasper, I would say, as the chairman.
There you go. I've got a WI meeting in Liverpool.
See you there.
It's right. If we've got enough people who want to do this, then please.
I think I was really thinking about the what was mentioned was it was in light of planning in this village, and there was a sort of self-imposed restriction on the village that was imposed that would be, it wasn't a village, it was a rural area, so no development of any.
Yeah, there is a basic problem, which is that if you are, I think it's changed. It's now called open countryside. I think is a technical term. We are open countryside. If you opt to be anything else, then all bets are off, and developers can come and buy up bits, and they can put hundreds of houses. So I seriously don't think you want to be anything other than open countryside.
I'd rather.
But if anybody wants to pursue this issue, please lobby the parish council. We'll let you think on it, and hopefully we're not going to hear from you again.
On any point.
Especially on that. Anyone else got any other points? Yeah.
Half the population of the village has changed in the last 12 years. So we do need to keep that together.
Yeah, it does tend to be the same half though, doesn't it? But, the point is that the half of the population that were here 12 years ago tend to be the same half that were here, 20 years ago, and so on. There's with a few exceptions, people do die out, but it's the same families that tend to be the constant, and then people come and people go. Okay, any other points, or can I close this meeting now? I can close the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.